Fight fans, welcome to the PBC podcast, brought to you by Premier Boxing Champions with your host, Kenneth Buhari and Michael Rosenthal.
Welcome everyone to the PBC podcast. I'm Kenneth Buhari.
And I'm Michael Rosenthal, editor of USA Today's Boxing Junkie.
Thanks as always for tuning in. This week we have 130-pound contender, or maybe 135, Chris Colbert joining us. Plus, on Toe to Toe, Mike and I will reveal our list of the top 5 welterweight matchups of the 21st century. And speaking of great welterweight matchups, the rumor mill is churning. Dan Rayfield reporting that he is hearing that the Errol Spence Jr. versus Terrence Crawford undisputed 147-pound match is nearing completion. Mike, this is a fight the fans have been yearning for some time now. What makes this matchup so significant?
Well, it's pretty simple to me. We talk all the time about how frustrating it is that the best don't fight the best as much as they should. At least that's the way it's perceived. Well, this certainly is that. These are two supremely talented, unbeaten guys who are in the top 5 of everybody's pound-for-pound list, future Hall of Famers. Of course, we never know how the fight itself will play out, but on paper, this matchup is about as big as it gets in boxing today.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of something Larry Merchant said when Felix Trinidad fought Fernando Vargas. He said something to the effect of, you can't pick fights out of a catalog, but this one sure feels like we did. And that's the case for Spence versus Crawford. What does a victory do for the winner of that fight?
Oh, man. As I said, they're both pound-for-pounders and future Hall of Famers going into the fight. I think a victory bolsters the winner's case that he's the best fighter in the world, full stop, period. And it goes beyond that. When you win a fight that's this big, particularly if you do it convincingly, when there's no guarantees that's going to happen, but it becomes sort of historic. I think the winner becomes one of those legends that we talk about.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and the loser could even go on to do great things. Who knows? Well, how does it compare to the biggest welterweight matchups of all time?
I think it does because of the reasons I've stated. I don't think people necessarily think of Spence and Crawford as being on the level of the legendary welterweights, guys like Leonard, De La Hoya, Mayweather, and Pacquiao, but that's primarily because they're still active. I think in time people will think back on Spence and Crawford as that kind of fighter. So yes, this would be just an absolutely classic matchup against two of the best fighters, doing it.
Yeah, and I just feel like given their styles, it's not going to disappoint. I mean, I've said that before, but I just think it's going to be a great matchup. Hopefully we get it soon. Let's jump right into our interview this week. Hailing from Brooklyn, New York, one of the more talented young fighters in the game, eager to make his ring return, Chris Primetime Colbert. Chris, first and foremost, how has your summer been?
It's been okay. I'm hanging in there. Listen, we ain't start off the summer too good, but I'm still alive. I'm blessed. Can't complain.
Is everything all right? Did something happen or?
No. You got to just remember, I'm coming off my first loss in over a decade.
Yeah.
I don't do this sport just for the money. I do this because I love this shit. So, of course, it's going to affect me some way.
Yeah, definitely. We definitely want to get into that. I've also seen that you've been real busy, being an entrepreneur, opening up businesses. Tell us a little bit about that.
Man, I'm trying to be rich beyond boxing. I'm trying to make sure my kids is good. So that's always the way to do it. That open the businesses, real estate, things like that.
That's interesting. You've always had that business-minded outlook and looking beyond just boxing, as you just said. Where did that mindset come from?
I'm a hustler. I was hustling since I was a little kid, selling pocketbooks, the fake pocketbooks on Fulton Street, selling the fake watches. I used to steal people's bikes and sell it to other people. And I've always been a hustler.
Oh, I love that. Tell us how fatherhood's been treating you.
Man, fatherhood is good. I got my son, my daughter. I'm blessed, man. I can't complain. I got what I wanted, and I'm just trying to be the best father to my kids I can be.
Yeah, that's a wonderful thing. Now, getting to boxing, we haven't caught up with you since your last fight, the loss to Hector Garcia in February. You've had some time now to reflect on it. Tell us what you think went wrong.
I didn't really need no time to reflect on it. I already knew it. Once I went in, I already felt like myself. I didn't feel like myself. Like I can't tell you what went wrong. I don't make no excuses at the end of the day. He just was a better man that night. And if he win this title that he's supposed to be fighting for this week, he's fighting this week, right?
Next week.
Well, whenever he's fighting, if he win that title, we definitely gonna run it back after I beat up on my next opponent.
Now, you mentioned you hadn't lost in 10 years, which is crazy. How difficult has it been to deal with that setback?
Oh man, it's very difficult. Like sometimes I just sit down and I just think to myself like, damn, you really lost. Like, damn, you was a loser.
Man, that's
like I always tell myself, I believe in myself. Like my mentor Deion Sanders told me, you gotta believe, and you just gotta remember that he beat you when you fighting his game. You went in there, you wasn't on your game. You went in there fought on his game. If you went in there, if he would have beat me on my game, then I could count. So I just gotta go back to the drawing board and do what I do best and come back and dominate and show the world that wasn't me.
Well, now you have some doubters. Does that motivate you to come back even stronger?
I don't. People been down me my whole life. You think them down me now is going to change? Something going to change? Nope.
Garcia is scheduled to fight Roger Gutierrez, who was your original opponent for February. You're a student of the game. Who do you think wins that fight?
I don't even know, but I hope Hector Garcia wins because I'm not no hater. And then I want to run it back.
Well, that makes perfect sense. Do you have any idea then when you might get back into the ring?
It's not really no date, but I'm definitely going to be back soon. I'm not about to be one of those fighters that take a loss and be out for the rest of the year or for a whole year. Nah, I can't do that. I don't even have that type of chill mentality to be sitting back and not fighting. This is what I love. This is what I do for real. So I get to work.
No, we've seen on social media there was talk of a possible fight versus Frank Martin, the undefeated lightweight. What is it about that fight that appeals to you?
Nah, nothing really. I mean, it's just more so like he was saying he's the top guy. He want to fight the best. Like he haven't even been challenged yet. So they could say this. I mean, they might say the same thing about me. I haven't been challenged yet, but y'all know my resume. Y'all know who got the best resume with 16 fights in the boxing sport of boxing right now. And he said something on TV that I like this about. He said something on TV that night like, I got like 2 more fights in me this year. So I hit up Al and I told Al, let's cut that shit to 1. and we're gonna make it happen. And then they got him as a big puncher and killer. Whatever they got him as down as, they got him as he's somebody scary. So I want to test myself and show the world what I'm really about, and go up in weight to beat up on him and then go back down.
So what are the chances that fight actually happens next, in your opinion?
It's happening.
Ooh, I love it. You're saying that it is happening. I think the fans can't wait for that. I mean, I'm sure you saw the feedback, when you went back and forth with Errol on social media. The fans haven't stopped talking about that fight.
Yeah, Errol Spence, that's I like Errol Spence. But I just want to show him that I'm really like that. I live what I the same way he proved me wrong so many times. I'm gonna prove him wrong come that night, and me and him we're gonna put on a little friendly bet.
But friendly sounds expensive where I'm from. I mean,
yeah, when it comes to guys like Errol Spence, you gotta bet the right money.
So Chris, you sort of just answered this, but I'll ask you anyway. So I guess there was never any thought to sort of taking a step back, maybe fighting a second-tier guy, and then getting back to the big names. You wanted to just jump right back into the big name.
I don't know when I'm gonna get out of fighting a bum. Well, I can't say really a bum. That's what people say. Like, you know how boxers, they be like, oh yeah, they want to come back and fight. They call fighters bums. So I don't want to come back and fight a guy that ain't gonna do nothing for my career. What he gonna do? Give me a quick knockout and fake build my confidence back up? I don't need confidence boosters. I'm already confident. I believe in myself already. I know what I can really do. So I already know that I really live this lifestyle, and I'm really that guy. Like, in the words of Deion Sanders, a lot of people try to be that, so it's time to be that. I was born that. I don't want to come back and fight nobody that's not really like not gonna do much for my career besides give me a supposedly confidence booster, when I don't need that. I was born with confidence. I believe in myself 100% still to this day. And to me, it's no backtracking. I don't backtrack. I only go forward. So I'm gonna keep going with this train that I've been on, and that's fighting guys that people think I can't beat, and come and dominate Frank Martin, and I'm gonna just leave the boxing world in shock. Well, the fake boxing world in shock. The real boxing world know what I can do and what I'm gonna do, how that fight is gonna play out. Should I say?
Yeah. What about the weight? Obviously, you wouldn't make the move if you weren't comfortable, but there's no doubts at all that you'd be comfortable at 35.
Believe it or not, like, y'all gonna see, I'm one of the biggest 130-pounders out there. Like, so me coming down to 30, it'd be like a little struggle, but I make it all the time, right? You see, my last couple fights, I've been like kind of struggling right on the dot on the weight. Me going up to 35 is just gonna give me more power, more comfortability in the ring.
You spoke about Deion Sanders and a couple of things he said. Have you spoken to him since February? Did you get some advice from him?
I just spoke to Deion 2 days ago. I'm supposed to go out there to Mississippi this week.
Oh.
To meet up with, speak to him.
How much of an asset, of a help has he been, through this process?
He's different. Like, just hearing the way he speaks, like, I wish I could play the video that I recorded of me and him speaking for y'all.
Wow.
But just listening to him speak, when he speaks, like, oh my God, I just feel the chills going through my body. Like, God.
Yeah, he's got the experience.
This guy. And I called him because let's be honest with yourself. A lot of people go through depression and things like that, but they just don't understand what's going on in their life, or they don't know how to handle it, right?
Yeah.
And Deion Sanders is one of those guys that went through depression. He tried to kill himself after winning the Super Bowl. His high horse, he tried to kill himself. On his high horse trying to kill himself after winning the Super Bowl. He was still empty. He didn't know why. He had all the money, all the girls, all the cars. He didn't know why he was still empty. I was on my high horse. I'm still on my high horse. I ain't gonna let nobody knock me down until I'm done. When I'm done, I'm taking myself off. But I'm still on my high horse. And I was going through a little stage of depression. I ain't gonna even lie to you, where it was hard for me, like, to even, like, really motivate myself. Because I know I wasn't supposed to lose that fight to a guy like this, Louis Hector Garcia. Not saying he's a bad fighter, but I just knew I'm a way better fighter than him. And the world knew that too. So it was just like, wow, how did we lose to him? So speaking of Deion Sanders, like I said, he tried to kill himself. He was at the top of the sport. He's arguably the best cornerback in NFL history. Nobody's better than him in my eyes. So speaking to him is like, he just motivated me every time he say something, because look where he at now. It don't matter what he went through or where he was at. Look is where he at now. He's that guy. And that just give me motivation every day, like, to be like, to still believe that, so I can still remind myself that I'm that guy.
Yeah.
When I got Deion Sanders calling me and telling me, "You that guy. You that guy. You ain't take no steps back. You ain't fall back. You just took a little pause, took a little break, but you that guy." And I just gotta go out there and show the world.
Yeah. Now, if the Martin fight doesn't happen, are there any other potential opponents, or you're confident this is what's?
I'm confident it's gonna happen, but you see me and Gary Russell had a little altercation. He just be talking though. He don't really want to fight me. I'll send him into retirement. I promise you. He just be talking. He's one of those fighters that just be talking. Call people out, but don't really want to fight. That's what he do. The contract could be signed and sent easy. We both with Al Heyman. What is the controversy? It ain't me. He say I'm just calling him out to put on the show. If I'm calling you out to just put on the show, make the fight happen and embarrass me. It could be that. It could be so easy, so simple, right?
Yeah.
Like I said, the Gary Russell fight could happen, but he just be talking. Man, I don't even care who I fight at this moment. I'm down to fight whoever, whatever, whenever. It don't even matter. Like I said, the Frank Martin fight, I'm confident it's gonna happen, but I don't care. I don't know where. I don't care where. It could be his home. I'm not going in there to make fights close. I'm going in there to dominate and beat the shit out of him. And it's crazy because I like Frank Martin. I said to Al that day too. I said, "Yo, he's actually good. Like, he's actually good." But I want to test myself. Oh yeah, shout out to Deion Sanders, man. Happy birthday to the GOAT.
Oh, that's right. Happy 55th. That's right.
Yeah, I was going to ask you early on whether that loss had any effect on your confidence, but you made it really very clear here that it hasn't had an effect on your confidence at all. Yeah.
What? My confidence is always going to be there. I'm alive. I can breathe. How can I lose my confidence? I still got two arms, and it's like lose confidence. That's impossible. I got to be dead. Well, I can't. When I can't box no more, then I can lose my confidence in the sport. Other than that, lose my confidence.
What do you want to say to your fans in closing?
Listen, I'll be back for sure. Believe in me or don't believe in me, it don't even really matter at this point. Just make sure y'all tune in to watch me. Either watch me win or either to watch me lose. It's going to be a great night. Oh my God, I can't wait. I just feel good just even thinking about it.
That's awesome, Chris. As always, thank you for taking the time to speak to us. Again, good to hear from you. We can't wait to see you back in the ring.
Adrian Broner. He wants to give the fans a show.
One of boxing's biggest draws, 4-division world champion Adrian "The Problem" Broner makes his must-see return to the ring.
Beautiful right uppercut. Wow.
But one-time belt holder Omar Figueroa isn't backing down.
Figueroa continues to come forward.
About to take it up a level. About to take it to another level. Broner versus Figueroa, plus 2 world title fights on Showtime.
Good talking to Chris Colbert. Can't wait for him to get back in the ring, but it's time for toe to toe. This week, Mike and I will tackle a fun topic: the top 5 welterweight matchups of the 21st century. One note, we decided to make our list entirely unique. So any fight you hear on Mike's list, you won't hear on mine, and vice versa. We'll go in ascending order. Mike, the floor is yours.
I wanted to add a little side note before we got started. So technically, the millennium and the century ended in the year 2000. So technically, we shouldn't include a fight from the year 2000. But I decided that, at least from my end, that this is for the 2000s, not necessarily the 21st century. So if that makes sense, I just want to make sure people understood that. And my first fight is not from the year 2000. It's from the year 2019. It's my number 5 is Errol Spence Jr. versus Sean Porter. Now, this was a big fight, period. Spence was evolving into a true star at that time, and Porter was a talented, proven commodity with a lot of respect from pretty much everybody. He'd only lost close decisions to Colbert and Keith Thurman going into that fight, and he was just primed and ready for that fight, if you recall. He was perceived as a serious test for Spence. But also on top of all that, perhaps more than any fight we're going to list here, this fight lived up to the hype. It was a fight of the year candidate for a reason. You know, Spence had his hand raised in the end, and what would be his biggest victory? But it was also just a back and forth war that thrilled the fans. That was a really memorable fight. So love the fact that it was a huge fight, but it also lived up to the hype.
Yeah, I think it exceeded the hype. I mean, I'm expecting a great fight, and we got that and more. That was really, it's one of the best fights I've been to live. I mean, just brilliant back and forth. And it wasn't, it was toe-to-toe, but with skill. Right. Just breathtaking round after round. And I think truly established Spence as the man in the welterweight division. Now, my number 5 is also one of my personal favorites, Keith Thurman versus Danny Garcia back in 2017 at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. Such a shame. It's the only fight from New York for me that is on this card. But, of course, 2 undefeated world champions, both of them with impressive resumes. Garcia, of course, had that incredible run at 140 pounds, and Thurman coming off that big win over Showtime Sean Porter. 16,533 people at Barclays Center, which was a record at the time for a boxing event. Over 5 million people watching on CBS, and it was beautiful back and forth for the first 6 rounds. Obviously, Thurman had the big punches in the first, sort of established himself as the bigger, stronger man in there. But Garcia, worked his way back into the fight, made it close down the stretch, but ultimately couldn't do enough to convince the judges. Thurman won a split decision, became the unified welterweight champ, and was the man in that division following that victory.
Yeah, I guess when you think about that area, you think about Mayweather and Pacquiao, but Thurman and Garcia were both young studs who had lost. They both had perfect records. Remember, Garcia was an absolute beast at 140 pounds. He had that crazy run of victories at 140 pounds. So you sort of wondered what was he going to do at 47. Well, Thurman, that was a big step, in terms of the way Thurman was perceived. And I think that Garcia sort of proved in that fight that, he came up a little bit short, but he definitely belonged. So another fight that lived up to the hype.
Yeah, absolutely. It really did. What's your number 4?
My number 4 is Floyd Mayweather versus Ricky Hatton. I felt like I had to include more than one Mayweather fight because of just how enormous he became. And I settled on this one. Mayweather was the biggest attraction of his generation, and it wasn't even close. But this fight took place just as he was emerging as the face of the sport. Floyd had outpointed Oscar De La Hoya 7 months earlier, which was sort of a passing of the torch fight at junior middleweight, if you will. He then went back down to 47 to face Hatton, who made their fight a true international fight. So that was huge in the United States, and it was enormous in the UK also, because Hatton was an unbeaten, huge figure at that time, having retired Kostitsu and followed that with a series of impressive victories. So this guy was really respected at that time. Some people even gave Hatton, I think, a chance to win the fight, which seems kind of silly now, but I think they did at the time. Of course, he didn't. Nobody did. But that was just a massive, massive fight. And the way he ended it was pretty dramatic, too, taking Hatton out the way he did. So that's another fight I won't forget.
Yeah, that ending was like out of a cartoon, hitting Hatton against the turnbuckle and dropping him. And the buildup for that fight was great, too. I mean, he couldn't have chosen a better follow-up fight to the Oscar fight than the Ricky Hatton fight. And I guess that's why, Manny Pacquiao followed that same blueprint and fought Hatton after he fought Oscar as well. But the buildup, I had Mayweather. I feel like he took something from Ricky Hatton in that fight, really beat him down and stopped him. I watched that fight as recently as a month ago, and it was just spectacular. Hatton truly was a really good fighter. All right, my number 4, Miguel Cotto versus Antonio Margarito, July 26, 2008 at the MGM Grand. This fight was a personal favorite. I was a big fan of Cotto, but I had a great deal of respect for Margarito. In fact, I remember purchasing his career DVD collection back then and watching all of his available bouts. Man, I thought he was extremely underrated. And at the time, Cotto was flying high. Some of my friends were nuts when I picked Margarito, but the fight went exactly as I expected. Cotto got off to a hot start, but Margarito's pressure, the stamina, the strength, the volume punching eventually wore him down. Margarito got the 11th round stoppage win. Some food for thought here. One thing that stood out to me in the fight was that Margarito looked slower than what I was accustomed to seeing from him. And I think he was even a little bit worn at that point, even though he had enough to beat Cotto. I also think both guys were dented, a bit by that fight because it was kind of brutal. And finally, obviously, the hand wraps controversy, which happened in Margarito's next bout, the one-sided TKO loss to Shane Mosley in 2009. Cotto believes Margarito cheated in their first fight. Cotto did win the rematch. We don't know what the truth is, but this win and many others for Margarito are now tainted, whether fairly or not.
Excellent recap of that whole situation. I was going to mention the thing about the hand wraps, and yeah, people will now going forward will always wonder, what fights did he have a hand wrap and what fights didn't. As far as we know, evidence, we only know he had the one fight, right? But you always just kind of wonder. So yeah, I'm not going to condemn the guy because I don't know, but the fact is that people think about that, and I think people might forget how fearsome Margarito was when he was at his best. He was just a physical monster. He didn't have the skill of Cotto, but who did? Not many people did, but he made up for that just with crazy physical strength.
And he did have skill.
Yeah, he did.
He was a skillful fighter, well conditioned. Everything. He's
really well conditioned.
Yeah,
really well conditioned.
Great chin.
Yeah, he just wasn't an elite technician,
right?
But he was a good enough technician to use his physical skills, which made him a beast. And
exactly.
It's really one of the most compelling two-fight series. The second fight was really dramatic because of what happened in the first fight. But yeah, that's a good call. That was an unforgettable fight.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Let's go to number 3. Who you got?
So my number 3 is Oscar De La Hoya versus Manny Pacquiao in 2008. So a lot of people thought this was a mismatch, including myself, I have to admit, going into the fight because Pacquiao was perceived as just a much smaller man. You said that Oscar was shot. I'm not sure he was shot, but he definitely was in serious decline, right? We all just kind of thought, listen, he's too big, and he's got enough left to beat a little guy like Manny Pacquiao. But in spite of that, even though that was sort of the perception of a lot of people, it was still a huge fight. Still a huge. Pacquiao had sort of was an emerging star, and De La Hoya was De La Hoya. You remember Pacquiao was on a roll with significant victories at 130 and then 135. The question was, could he jump up to 47 and beat a guy like De La Hoya? Well, we know what happened. Pacquiao beat the you-know-what out of Oscar and stopped him after 8 rounds. I think that victory is what made Pacquiao a superstar. He sort of took a step to the next level. So in that sense, it was an enormously important fight for boxing.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree with you. Let me tell you, I was with you. I thought it was a total mismatch. I was infuriated. I was like, how can we allow Oscar De La Hoya, a guy who fought at middleweight, to pick on this little guy? This is an outrage, and we're going to pay for this? Well, 1.25 million people paid for it, and man, they got their money's worth. And let me tell you something. That night, I was in ecstasy. I was like, Oscar cherry-picked this guy, and he got his comeuppance. But look, that's not the story of what happened. The story of what happened was that Manny Pacquiao was really brilliant. He was really on his game that night. The speed, the power, the combinations, he had everything. He destroyed Oscar that night. Retired him, basically. And as you said, it was a turning point in boxing history. My number 3 involves Miguel Cotto once again. Manny Pacquiao versus Miguel Cotto, November 14th, 2009. And for me, when this fight was announced, I was like, okay, enough is enough. Yes, Manny destroyed a shot Oscar. Then he moved down and KO'd a faded, Ricky Hatton. But Miguel Cotto, I don't care if he lost to Margarito or arguably lost to Joshua Clottey too. And no, I don't believe the weight limit affected Cotto. I picked Cotto to win by TKO because there's no way Manny Pacquiao could beat an elite welter in his prime. Not a guy who used to fight, in minimum weight division or wherever he was at the beginning of his career. But I was all the way wrong. Wrong. Pacquiao did a number on this guy. It was brutal. Yeah, Cotto had his moments, the same way I have my moments when I argue with my wife. But ultimately, he had no shot at winning. Pacquiao just put the beats on him, stopped him in the 12th, and all of a sudden, folks began picking Pacquiao to beat Floyd Mayweather. And honestly, I did not blame them after that fight, Mike.
Yeah, I'm really. You explained that we don't have the same fights, but I'm glad you had that on your list. So because I was at that fight. I was at most of those Pacquiao fights during that peak period. And what stood out for me, well, first of all, going in, I did not have the same take as you. I thought Pacquiao was going to beat him. But I remember, because I knew how good Cotto was, and I thought this is a test. But I thought Pacquiao, by that, I was already convinced of Pacquiao that he could beat pretty much anybody, and then he did.
Yeah.
But what I remember about that fight is Cotto was Cotto, and then he felt his power earlier in the fight, and he didn't Cotto doesn't just survive, but he fought differently. He sort of fought more carefully, and he moved, this kind of thing. Is he's like, holy crap, this guy punches that. And at that time, he did punch really hard. And so he didn't really want to engage him that much. And then he finished it off in style with the knockout. That was one of the best performances of Pacquiao's career.
Yeah, Cotto didn't just switch up his style for that fight. He switched up his style for like the next 2 years. I mean, that's how much Pacquiao's punches affected him.
Yeah, I remember early in the fight, it just seemed like in an instant he took a shot. And he's like, "Oh my God, this guy that really hurt."
Yeah.
So unforgettable fight. Another unforgettable fight.
Absolutely. Have you done your number 2?
So it's Mosley De La Hoya in 2000. De La Hoya was only 2 fights removed from his controversial loss to Felix Trinidad, but he was still the biggest star in the sport in the year 2000. And Mosley had been just an absolute terror at 135. We've talked about this off the podcast, maybe on the podcast. He was incredible as a lightweight. Skipped over 140 to 147 a few fights earlier with the specific, purpose of getting a shot at Oscar. It was a huge matchup, to get 2 guys who had been rivals in the Los Angeles area since they were kids. So the showdown had been building for a long, long, long time. And they didn't disappoint. This is another really good fight. I think it lived up to the hype. Fans saw a spirited, memorable battle that ended up being a breakthrough for Mosley. That was the biggest step he had taken in his career to that point. And I remember Oscar was really frustrated after the fight because he thought he did enough to win. I scored it for Mosley, but it was a really good, close fight. And more important, it was an entertaining, memorable fight.
Yeah. I thought it was a close fight. Close but clear for Mosley, but a close fight. Oscar's nothing to be ashamed of. I mean, that was one of the better versions of Oscar I had ever seen. I thought it was really impressive that night, but I gained a whole new respect for Shane Mosley, who was brilliant at 135, but I thought couldn't beat Oscar De La Hoya at 147. But boy, did he ever. I mean, he had everything that night: the speed, the power, the quickness. He looked like a little mini, Ray Robinson. He was just unbelievable, really, that performance. I don't know if he was ever that good again, but that was special. Oscar raised his game, and then Shane took it to another level. Now, my number 2, Floyd Mayweather against Sugar Shane Mosley. Let me take you guys back to what was going on back then. Mayweather and Pacquiao negotiations had fallen apart. It was a 50-50 deal, but ultimately fell apart over drug testing. There were a lot of people who thought Mayweather had no right to ask for unannounced random blood and urine testing, even though Pacquiao had also asked for a $10 million weight penalty fee. Funny enough, now that testing is pretty much the norm in boxing today. So a lot of folks thought that when the negotiations fell apart, Floyd would look for a soft touch. I mean, definitely not Shane Mosley, who had called Floyd out just a few months earlier in the ring after Floyd had just shut out Juan Manuel Marquez. Floyd definitely didn't want any of that. I mean, that was the narrative then, when in fact it was Manny Pacquiao who turned down the opportunity to fight Shane. But, of course, in the few months between the time Shane called Floyd out in the ring up until Floyd signed the contract to fight him, it was just a few months. Shane went from being the lineal welter champ, a top 3 pound for pounder, the most feared, welterweight, to being an old fighter that Floyd cherry picked. But the fact is, he was all those things. He was a lineal welterweight champ. He was a top 3 pound for pounder, and he was considered the most feared welterweight coming off that frightening knockout win over Antonio Margarito. Anyway, what a performance that was. May 1st, 2011 at the MGM Grand. Floyd rocked by Shane in round 2 twice in that frame, and he showed his grit, his chin, his iron will to go along with his brilliant skills, beat down Shane, probably could have stopped him, and won a 12-round unanimous decision that served notice to all that Mayweather was still the man.
Yeah, another fight that I had the good fortune of seeing live. I guess I had a little bit.
Don't rub it in.
Well, you've been to a lot that I haven't. So I think it balances out. Although I was going to fights when you were in diapers, I think. So that's a whole different conversation.
Oh, Lord.
What was I going to say? So I got to see that fight. I have a little bit of different perspective on Mosley. You know, Mosley was coming off the Margarito fight, but he obviously wasn't quite the fighter that he was. He at least started his decline. And I think in retrospect, the Margarito fight was sort of his last hurrah, but he was still a good fighter. I still had respect for Shane even after the Mayweather fight, but he was getting older. Anyway, definitely not a pushover. If anybody said that, that's ridiculous. But anyway, one of the things that stands out about that fight is Mosley rocked Mayweather. With
a great fighter that May La Hoya was.
He would have been a great fighter. They're a great figure in the sport of boxing. That's funny. But what was it? A right that was? I guess it was a right hand that rocked Mayweather. I remember seeing like his knees buckle. But actually, that showed me, man, this guy's not only is he got all this skills, this crazy skill set, like once in a generation, once in a century skill set. He also had a great chin. Because I think that punch would have knocked out a lot of people.
Oh, absolutely.
And Mayweather just took it and came and did his thing against Mosley. I remember talking to Mosley afterward. He said, "Man, I got close. That punch, I got close, but it just didn't happen." So anyway, another. Well, these are all memorable fights. That's why we have them on our list. But it's really fun going down memory lane. These are all great events.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember Mayweather during the post-fight press conference. You know, when they asked him about that punch of getting rocked, he's like, "Well, I hadn't been hit in 3 years." Because he had only one fight in between obviously the Marquez fight. And I'm like, so you're saying that you wouldn't have been hurt by that punch if you were active? Those were, 2 big shots from Shane Mosley. Now, my number one, Manny Pacquiao versus Juan Manuel Marquez, Part 4, December 8th, 2012 at the MGM Grand Garden Arena. By this point, I think there were quite a lot of people who were overseeing these two battle. Fortunately, they continued. We had 2 great fights in the lower divisions, and then they met again in November 2011 at welterweight. I remember a lot of folks thought it would be a mismatch, Marquez moving up at welter, where Pacquiao just looked like he was just phenomenal. A great rivalry. All the fights were great, but this time there was an ending with no controversy. First was the shock of seeing Pacquiao down in round 3 off that right hand from Marquez. Then Pacquiao drops Marquez in round 5, and just when it looked like Manny was going to get the best of him once more, he walks into that perfect right hand seconds before the end of the 6th. Lands face first, and that is that. What an incredible moment in boxing history. My jaw dropped. I yelled out loud. For me, this was right up there with Jones-Tarver too. Yeah,
that was one of the most unbelievable things I've ever seen. I think just off the top of my head, the 3 most dramatic knockouts I ever saw were Foreman and Moore, Pacquiao and Hatton, and then Pacquiao getting knocked out by Marquez. And I remember watching that fight, at ringside. It's ringside. You say ringside, people think, oh, you're like your nose is up against the ropes. No, it's kind of hard to see sometimes exactly what's going on. So I'm watching this fight, and it was exactly how you described it. Pacquiao seemed to be coming on at the end, and all of a sudden Pacquiao just disappeared. All of a sudden, and then we realized, Pacquiao's down, and then Pacquiao's down. And like, what the hell did we just witness? It was almost like there was so much frustration on Marquez's part from the previous fights. Some people think he won all the fights. So I think for him, this was just an unbelievable thing. But for people watching, I just have never seen anything more dramatic than that.
Yeah, it was just like, it was unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. I can't get over that fight. Just thinking about it now, it was such a great fight. I mean, the ending was a shocker, but the fight itself was really, really great. Your number one.
Okay, so I'm sort of stating the obvious. And I think if we both just didn't talk to each other and if we allowed, ourselves to overlap, I think we both would have landed this, number one with this fight. That's Floyd Mayweather versus Manny Pacquiao, 2015. Yeah. I personally wish the fight had happened 5 years earlier. I think both guys were a little past their primes when the fight took place. And the fight itself probably wasn't a classic fight. It was a good fight, but it wasn't a classic fight. But that said, it was the biggest event in the history of the sport in terms of pay-per-view buys and the money that it generated. It had 4.6 million pay-per-view buys in the U.S., which shattered all the records. And the fighters made a combined, close to $500 million. I think Mayweather made a $250 million, $300 million, something like that for this fight.
Something insane.
Yeah, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm sure no athlete in the history of the world has made that much money for one event. So that's just crazy stuff, off the chart stuff. It was by far the two biggest stars of their generation in the same ring, doing their thing at the very peak of their earning power, if nothing else. And it was just when I say it's an enormous event, it was an understatement because it was beyond that.
Yeah, I think I read that it generated over $1 billion for Las Vegas. It was just, that was an event. That was something like, something I have not seen in my lifetime, certainly 4.6 million pay-per-view buys. I mean, that was insane. That was a case of a fight where you knew it was a big fight. I remember folks talking like, maybe that's 2 million buys. Can it do 2 million buys? Will it shatter Oscar's record? It damn near doubled De La Hoya versus Mayweather. It just caught fire, got bigger and bigger. I remember when the two met at the basketball game and nearly shut the internet down. It shut social media down with everyone talking about Mayweather and Pacquiao met at the basketball game and had a conversation, and it was on from that point. I mean, what can you say about that fight? Did it live up to the hype? No, but as you said, it was a good fight. It was a good technical fight. But ultimately, Mayweather did what he does best, and so did we. That's going to do it for this week's episode. We want to thank Chris Colbert for joining us. And as always, you guys for tuning in. Be sure to check us out next week for more boxing talk, more interviews right here on the PBC podcast.